Welcome to another episode of A Cuppa with a Conversationalist. My name is Con and I am the Conversationalist. And yes, as always, I have my latte in tow. Today, we're going to be speaking bowel cancer. And it used to be considered an old person's disease, but statistics tell us that it is now the number one killer of 25 to 30-year-olds by cancer. And it's up from number 9 40 years ago. My guest today to share his story and raise awareness of bowel cancer is Nick Lee. Welcome, Nick.
Welcome, Con. Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolute pleasure. Nick is a corporate health expert and co-director and partner of Healthy Minds and chairman and founder of the Jodi Lee Foundation. Nick was a 2015 SA South Australian of the Year finalist and was awarded the 2013 Social Entrepreneur of the Year for the Central Region by Ernst & Young. In 2022, Nick was awarded the Medal of the Order of Australia, receiving this recognition for his service to the community through the not-for-profit sector with the Jodi Lee Foundation and his commitment to raising awareness for the early detection and prevention of bowel cancer. Again, Nick, welcome to the program.
Good to be here, Con.
It's 2008. You've got a beautiful family. You're working as a director of a multinational consumer goods company. Pardon me. And you've got pretty good reason to be happy and optimistic about the future. However, that changed in an instant. Take it from there, if you would.
Yeah, so we were in Vietnam as director at Unilever, and I don't know whether you've been to Vietnam, Con, but it's a wonderful place, beautiful people. We were having the time of our lives, 2 young kids. When we moved over to Vietnam, my daughter Bella was only 2 years old and Jack was 4. And it was a Thursday night and I was away with my team in Hanoi. We were based in Ho Chi Minh City. And Jodie, 39 years old, gives me a phone call and says, look, I've got some abdominal pain and I'm not really sure what it is. And I didn't know anything about bowel cancer. I thought it was an older person's disease. Jodie was, as I said, 39, fit, healthy. She didn't have any family history. So, look, I wasn't concerned at that time, but I was concerned enough to say or suggest to Jodie that she go off and see a GP, which she did the next morning. So Friday morning, off to see the GP, an Australian lady. Unfortunately, she very quickly recognised that there was a block in Jodie's bowel and had some scans done immediately. And the results of those scans came back at 3 o'clock that afternoon, showing that there was a block in her bowel. And an ambulance turns up at our house at 11 p.m. that same night. Kids are fast asleep. I'm still away with my team in Hanoi, and Jodie's taken to Ho Chi Minh Airport, where she's airlifted at low level to Bangkok for emergency surgery, because what the scan showed was a tumour had almost entirely blocked her bowel, and they were worried if they flew her at normal altitude that she might burst her bowel.
Yeah.
And that's one of the issues with bowel cancer. They call it the silent killer for that reason. Often it doesn't throw up the early warning signs like you might get with many other diseases. So I made my way as quickly as I could from Hanoi to Bangkok to be with Jodie for the surgery. And that went really well. They removed a piece of Jodie's colon, about 6 inches long, to get rid of the tumour. But 3 days after that, a specialist came to see us. And it was quite bizarre because Bumrungrad Hospital in Bangkok's this massive public hospital, and right at the main reception area, where a heap of people coming backwards and forwards and asking different questions, this chap sits down to go through Jodie's prognosis. And shortly into the conversation, Jodie felt a bit faint and thought, I'll go up to my room, and I'm left there with the specialist and a lot of medical speak before the obvious question was, what does all that mean? And he told me that the cancer had spread to her lymph and her liver. It was stage 4 bowel cancer, and at best she had 2 years to live. So you can imagine that hit me like a sledgehammer. From a few short days before that, being on top of the world, to receiving that news just was devastating. And I walked up to Jodie's room, and I'll never forget putting my hand on the door handle and thinking, what am I going to say to her?
Yeah.
How do you tell someone you love that at best they've got 2 years to live. And I sat outside that room for what felt like an hour. It was probably only a few minutes. Walked in, decided that sharing the time frame wasn't going to help Jodie, but said that we needed to race back to South Australia, where both of our families lived, to commence treatment. And that period of time was particularly tough. She went through multiple rounds of chemo. She had 3 major abdominal operations, a treatment called radiospheres. We even tried Chinese medicine. Nothing seemed to work. And we realised in August 2009 that we'd pretty much run out of treatment options. So we did what I hope will be the hardest conversation I ever have to have in my life, and that's to tell my 2 young kids that their mum was going to die. And we didn't want to scare them, but we wanted to give them an opportunity to talk to us about what was on their mind. And at that point, we thought Jodie had about 12 months to live. But unfortunately, shortly after that conversation and just before her 42nd birthday, back on January 16, 2010, she passed away from the bowel cancer. So yeah, that was really the trigger for setting up the Jodi Lee Foundation. It's hard to describe to your listeners, when you go through something like that, the impact that it has on you and of course your family and other friends. And I just had this overwhelming compulsion that I wanted to do everything that I could to prevent others going through what I went through. So that was the main reason I set up the foundation back in August 2010.
Goodness me. I guess my first question, Nick, were there any other symptoms? Looking back on it, and hindsight's a wonderful thing. Were there any other symptoms that may have indicated there was a problem?
Look, there was a couple of, and of course you can't really stop yourself going back and thinking about that question, Con. Not that it probably helps you at that time, but we did that exercise, and I think, there was times where Jodie felt low in iron and or low in energy, which was a lowness in her iron levels. About 4 weeks before, she woke up in the middle of the night with really strong abdominal pain, which she said felt like contractions. But we're living in Vietnam. It came and went, and so you don't really think too much of it. And look, in reality, 4 weeks prior to her going off to see the doctor, it wouldn't have changed her outcome.
No.
But yeah, that is the big issue with bowel cancer symptoms. Often they can be passed off as either other things, particularly in younger people, or just things that everybody has to deal with. She had a little bit of bloating, she had a bit of low energy, and of course that can be a whole host of things.
I'm as I said to you before we started recording, I've done a little bit of research because, again, not to detract from your story, but to add awareness to the listeners and the viewers. My family has been directly impacted by bowel cancer, and so my level of awareness is quite high on a personal level as well. But it was always considered an old person's disease. And statistics that I saw certainly indicated a significant increase in detection or diagnosis of a younger demographic. And what you shared with me absolutely blew me away, that it's now the number one killer by cancer in 25 to 30-year-olds. And 40 years ago, it was number 9. And so there has to be something there. It can't just be, fate or whatever. There's got to be some reason. What are your thoughts behind that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And look, there's a lot of research going on into that, and there's not a current definitive answer. But of course, I've been in this space for 14 years. So whilst I'm not a medical specialist, I've had quite a bit of experience. And for me, it's a few things. And when you look at less developed countries like Vietnam and like some other Asian countries where, well, let's just take Vietnam, for example. There's people are moving a lot more throughout the day, and they're eating fresher foods. And I think that those two things are a really, really big thing that has caused the elevation of bowel cancer in developed countries. So we're moving less because we don't need to. Everything's becoming more convenient. Exercise is such a wonderful way of reducing your risk of bowel cancer and many other diseases. And we know from a study that came out of the US that people with a sedentary lifestyle have a 24% greater risk of colorectal cancer. So that whole movement and exercise, I'll sort of bucket those together for the purposes of this discussion, is really, really critical. And whilst on one hand, it helps you protect bowel cancer, on the other hand, if you do have a sedentary lifestyle, it significantly increases your risk. So that's one factor. I think the second factor comes down to diet. And I think the increase in ultra-processed foods is a big factor. And when you look at different diets around the world and you look at relationships with disease, including bowel cancer, there's very much a linear relationship between the increase in ultra-processed foods and these types of diseases. And of course, there's increasing prevalence in Australia of diabetes. There's a connection there with bowel cancer. Obesity, there's a connection there with bowel cancer. So diet, I think, plays a really important role. And it's something that I'd love your listeners to have a think about. Look, it's probably impractical that we only eat raw foods, but I have a pretty simple philosophy when it comes to diet, and that's an 80-20 rule. So 80% of low human intervention food. So if you can recognize the food, it's probably good for you to eat. If it's in a packet with a whole list of ingredients and it's ultra processed, then it's not necessarily good for you. So I have and try as much as I possibly can to have that 80-20 split, which, for me is I've found pretty easy to maintain. But you've got to shop from the outsides of the supermarket, your fresh foods, rather than the middle aisles, which are chock full of ultra processed foods, unfortunately.
Yeah. Touche. Raising awareness is obviously for the demographic is really important. But one little stat that I stumbled upon, which I found fascinating, and I kind of related that back to my mum, which I'll share in a moment, that one of the problems, there's doctors are not necessarily are aware of perhaps bowel cancer being an issue when younger demographic go to them with a particular health issue. So the age of the patient has been a barrier of the doctor recognizing and going, hey, I think we need to go and get you tested for bowel cancer. But instead they're determining that it may be something else. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we hear that a lot, Con, and when you consider bowel cancer is 99% preventable if it's detected early, we need to start to change these and jump on the symptoms really quickly, whether you're 20 years old or you're 80 years old. And we find a lot of those stories where people have presented to their GP with very clear symptoms of bowel cancer and been told they're too young for bowel cancer, and a lot of other things explored before finally getting on to the bowel cancer potential risk, and often then it's too late. In fact, there was this police lady on the Gold Coast who we got connected with, and her story was that she had 4 kids and she was pregnant at the time that she was experiencing these symptoms. So three other kids, and as well as pregnant with her fourth. And she was quite young. She was in her late 30s, similar to Jodi. And she was going back to her GP with this abdominal pain. And the GP was saying, well, look, it's part of your pregnancy, and probably in his mind thinking that she was too young for bowel cancer. And having had previous kids and having both boys and girls, she kind of thought, no, this is not right. And went and sought a second opinion and was told the same thing, a third opinion, but that sort of to and froing went on for quite some time. And by the time she was diagnosed with bowel cancer, she was stage 4. She died shortly after, leaving 4 kids under the age of 15. So there's some often tragic outcomes with, potential misdiagnosis. So for us, that's an important part of what we do, trying to not only raise awareness of the public, to empower people. And what we've got a campaign called Trust Your Gut. And that's all about encouraging Australians, when they feel something is wrong, acting quickly and continuing to go back for opinions if you don't think whatever you've been given to do is actually working for you. So that's really important. And the other aspect to that is educating GPs on looking out for the warning signs and being aware that this is no longer an older person's disease. Whilst the government is currently sending screening tests out to people from 50 and above, that's purely a cost benefit based on statistics. And the statistic you read out before is that a lot of younger people are getting this disease. So we need to start to recognize that and act accordingly. And I have a lot of empathy for GPs, because they've got a lot of patients and they haven't got a lot of time. And often Australians find it embarrassing to talk about the fact that they saw some blood when they went to the toilet. And we've all got bowels. We all go to the toilet. It's something that we shouldn't be embarrassed talking about, and we have to talk about it. And so that's something that we're also very much focused on.
And again, it was always, when both my parents died from bowel cancer, as I mentioned, this is 15 odd years ago now, and they were in their mum was nearly 80 and dad was 84 or 85. But going back to the GP, my mum had been presenting for at least 2 years prior with bleeding from the bowel. And he put it down to her blood thinners for 2 years. Until eventually she was taken to hospital for a heart condition. One thing led to another, led to another, led to another. Stage 4 bowel cancer. And so we just typically I think humans are, I guess, intimidated by their doctors, because the doctor is supposed to be, I guess, and I say this in a nice way, the know-it-all, the professional. And so we're intimidated and we go, oh, okay, well, if you reckon that's it. But what you're saying about trust your gut is just so important. You have to keep asking questions. You have to keep going back until you find the answer.
Yeah, and your history, Con, points to a couple of really big factors. So with your mum noticing some bleeding, that is, and I want your listeners to understand too, that is the most important thing to look at. We also have another program that we run with a national pharmacy chain called View Your Poo. And that was encouraging Australians to have a look when they went to the toilet. And if they saw any blood, to get off and see the GP. So that's one really important aspect. By far and away, that's the most important symptom to watch out for. And the other aspect to your story, because I understand your brother also was diagnosed with bowel cancer is the family history component. So between 20 to 30% of cases each year have a link to family history. So you mentioned to me before we came on air how conscious you are of it, and it's really important because I had no idea of my parents' family history, and Jodie didn't understand her family history prior to her being diagnosed. So, we've just had Christmas, and hopefully a lot of people got together with their families. We should be having these conversations with our families and understand what our history is, and then make sure that we do all that we can to minimise our risk if it is a familial disease.
Going back one step, was there any history on Jodie's side of the family out of interest?
No, there wasn't. There was some breast cancer in her family, but not bowel cancer, so unrelated to Jodie's bowel cancer. Look, and that's from what we know right now, Con. So there's a lot of breakthroughs happening in the area of genetics. So maybe there may be something that was going on for Jodie that we weren't clear on at the time. But fortunately, my kids, there was a particular gene that if it had been passed down to my kids, they would have been significantly predisposed to bowel cancer. So I had all that tested, checked out, and fortunately they didn't have that gene. So they'll keep testing anyway because they should. But unfortunately there's not that gene present.
Okay, you just mentioned something that I wasn't aware of, and I'm really fascinated to explore. There's genetic testing available. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. So we had some tissue samples from Jodie for that specific reason. The kids were 6 and 8 when Jodie died, so very, very young. And so it was really important for me to understand whether this gene had been passed down, and then I would have been able to get some advice around what I should do about that. So that's something that there's been a huge amount of breakthroughs in the last few years. I mean, a classic example was we had some years ago, a participant in our New York Marathon event, which is one of the events we do to raise money and awareness. And young guy, 28 years old, no family history to speak of, and he had a positive test only because he was part of the foundation group and he wanted to understand what it was all about. Did the test, got a positive result, and they found 100 polyps in his bowel, and he had absolutely no idea. So there's something going on there. Whether that was a genetic thing at the time, they couldn't find a genetic link, but there's something going on there for that individual to have that many polyps. So yeah, it's important that people know, as I said, their family history, and if they want to take that step to go to some genetic testing, that's something that's available.
Okay, so how would they approach that? And I say that out of obviously concern for my kids. I've got 2 children, so both my parents have succumbed to bowel cancer. I have a brother who was diagnosed with bowel cancer, and because of his lack of, and I say this to absolutely emphasize the warnings that and the awareness that you're trying to raise with the audience here. We were told categorically by my mum's specialist that as kids we needed to get tested because we had a higher likelihood of bowel cancer, and he was the only one that didn't go off and get tested. So what can my kids do? Is there anything specifically they can do, or were you only able to do that genetic testing because you had a sample from Jodie?
Well, I was only able to do that testing because I had a sample from Jodie, and I've still got those samples. So, 14 years later, I'm thinking that I'll do some research again and see if there has been any breakthroughs and get that tissue tested again if there has. But a great place to start is your GP, and have a conversation with your GP, and they can refer you to a genetic counsellor if they think that's a good idea, or a medical geneticist. was kind of, I got referred through my oncologist or Jodie's oncologist at the time. So yeah, there's definitely probably the best place for people to start if they are concerned about a family history, and then perhaps want to take that next step is a conversation with the GP.
I'm curious, that gentleman that you were speaking about before, that they found 100 polyps, what was his outcome?
So great outcome, because he got to it early. And look, there wouldn't have been a GP in the country at the time that would have said, Tom, you need to go and get a bowel screening test. So he was very, very lucky. He is now 38 years old. He's married. He's got 2 young kids, and he's continuing to run. So he'll live a long, healthy, happy life thanks to acting as quickly as he did. And clearly there was a big amount of luck involved there, because he was part of the Jodi Lee Foundation team. So yeah, I think that the key thing there comes back to that, for particularly for younger people, that whole trust your gut principle.
Yeah.
If it doesn't feel right, get off and see your GP.
And interesting, like we were talking about other symptoms that Jodi may have had when you look back, and fatigue was one of the things that, but you put it down to a whole raft of potential reasons. A friend of my daughter's, Angelo, 30 years old, fit, healthy young man, probably for about 6-8 months, fatigue, bit of weight loss, figured that it was just his exercising. Bottom line, gets tested, stage 4 bowel cancer, dead at 32.
Horrible.
This is, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this, this is it. It's so preventable if you get it early. Trust your gut. I can't stress it enough. It's just scary. Nick,
and I think males, particularly, Con, it's important. The mortality between females, sorry, the incidence between females and males is about 50-50, but the mortality is higher in men because we are just slow to get to it. So
okay.
It's an important message, your message to all your listeners, but do think about it as the male listeners, because we typically don't end up going to see the GP until there's something really, really wrong. With bowel cancer, it's one of those diseases, you want to know about it, you want to act quickly, and if you do act quickly and it's caught early, your prognosis is brilliant. If you catch it at stage 4, like the person in your story, and like Jodi, the prognosis is grim.
It's so true. Somebody said to me, if you want to get, if you have to have a cancer, bowel cancer is probably the one you want early.
Yeah,
really early. And so stay on top of it. Yeah, again, this is about raising awareness for our listeners. Look, Nick, what I want to do is move on to the foundation, and if you could share, I guess, firstly, what was, I understand the motivation was Jodi's passing, but what was the behind that, starting the foundation, and tell us about the work that the foundation does, please.
Yeah, so I guess there was 2 motivations. One is a very clear motivation, which is a personal motivation, given the impact of losing someone you love. The other was in those statistics that we've been talking about. I didn't have a medical background, so I couldn't really contribute to coming up with a cure, but I had a background in corporate and marketing and sales, and so I felt like if I could just encourage people to protect themselves, we had an opportunity to make a difference. And I'm really proud of the impact that we've had over that 14 years. Loads of early detection stories, and it's prevalent. You mentioned second leading cancer killer in all Australians, leading cancer killer in 25 to 34-year-olds, and 99% preventable if caught early, up to 99% preventable. So prevalent and preventable. So all of the initiatives of the foundation are built around prevention. And our vision is to beat this disease. And when you consider it is so preventable, despite it being so prevalent, I can see a future where no Australian has to die of this disease. We're a long way off that. We've got a big job to do. But with a vision to beat this disease, we have 4 very important messages for people to protect themselves. B is be active and healthy. And I talked about that diet and lifestyle factors before. E is to explore your family history, and we talked about that in relation to your situation, Con, and my kids. A is to act on symptoms. We talked about some of those symptoms, particularly blood when you go to the toilet, abdominal pain, weight loss, bloating, they're all, and change in bowel habits, they're all key symptoms to watch out for. And T is to take the simple test. So the government send that out when people turn 50. We're hoping that they're going to lower the age given those prevalence of statistics in younger people. But you can also get one of those tests through our website, through the Cancer Council website, or through pharmacies. So there's easy access to those simple tests. They're not particularly expensive. They cost about $40 and really, really important to do. So with that message, so we're really just trying to get out with that message to as many people as we possibly can. And I talked about some of our initiatives, View Your Poo, Talking Shit. We've got, Talking Shit is another campaign that we're raising awareness in rural and remote areas with Gavin Langanine and Murph Hughes, and Trust Your Gut. So all sorts of key initiatives to try and raise that level of awareness. We have a lot of partnerships. So we, partner with AFL, and we partner with corporates, and we partner with other organisations to get that message out there, like the pharmacies in that sort of medical health space as well. We do a lot on social media. We run a lot of events, which are not only great ways to raise awareness and raise money for the foundation, but also get people moving more. So a lot of this information about what we do sits on our website if anybody is interested in exploring it further, or we'd love your listeners to join some of our events. We've got a trek here in South Australia coming up in May, which is always a really popular one. But lots of work that we do, lots of early detection stories, but as I mentioned, Con, a really, really big job to ahead of us to try and lower those statistics.
Yeah, it is a big job indeed. Nick, what we will do for the benefit of the viewers and listeners, any links that you can help us with in terms of your website, your programs, your fundraisers, anything like that, forward those to me, and we'll put those in the show notes for the listeners and viewers. And we implore you, don't put it off. If something doesn't feel right, act on it. And we talk about, you mentioned, Nick, about men. I guess it's almost a social thing for us. We've been told, you got to be tough, suck it up, don't do that, you're all right, there's nothing wrong with you. And of course, we know as men, prostate cancer and bowel cancer are 2 of the biggest killers. So what's your message to the blokes out there?
Yeah, it's not one to stick your head in the sand. You're absolutely right. You just gotta act. And I've of course seen the other side. So I can speak with firsthand knowledge of the impact that it has and how broad that impact is across family and friends. I have kids who've had to grow up without a mother, and we all love Jodi dearly, and she had a large group of friends that were all very much impacted. So the ramifications are really, really broad. So if you're not prepared to do it for yourself, because you have that kind of I'll just get over it, or I'll be all right, hardwired into you, do it for your family and friends. It's just so important. I guess it's my biggest frustration, Con, is the fact that we haven't been able to convince more people to act, because I know if we had, we would have saved many more lives. So my plea to all your listeners is just be conscious, be aware, and then if you don't feel right, act. And when you do get your screening test from the government when you turn 50, make sure you do it. At the moment, when Australians first get that test, when they're first eligible at the age of 50, only 33% of Australians complete it. So it just points to the challenge, that we've got convincing people to act.
What are your thoughts? How can we increase 33? Staggering. I would have thought it would have been a lot higher.
Yeah, and it's, you know what? It's interesting because, and this probably points to one of the problems, is the reparticipation rate. So once someone's done the test once, the reparticipation rate is up around 80%.
Okay.
So people going to go, okay, geez, that was easy. I thought it was icky. I thought it was yucky. It was a bowel screening test. I don't want to do it. They've done it once and they realize how simple it is. So part of our big challenge is convincing people to do it for the first time, because we know if they do, they're highly likely to do it again. And look, the other thing that we know is that partners play a really important role in nudging their partner to actually take the test, and GPs play an important role as well, because of that level of credibility that they have. So have a relationship with your GP. Encourage your family and friends to take the test, and if I'm talking to you as an individual, do it. It's so simple and it may save your life.
And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, listeners and viewers, doing a stool sample is a lot easier than changing and cleaning your colostomy bag.
Yeah, and you know that.
Let that sink in. So when you get your screening test, do it. Let's do everything that we can to get that up from 33%. And if you're under 50 and you're not receiving the government sample kit, please, for $40, just go and do it. Just go and do it. Yeah, wow. Okay. Nick, again, I can't thank you enough for your time and sharing your story today. And one of the things that I've said all along with why I started this program is I've had the pleasure of interviewing some amazing individuals who have had some wonderful, well, when I say wonderful, some powerful stories. And my logic behind it was, if I can impact one person's life by doing a program, it's been worth it. And if we can save one person by not going through what you had to go through and what Jodi dealt with, and certainly what my family have dealt with, this has been an outstanding success as a program. Nick, again, I thank you very, very, very much for your time and sharing your story. Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today has been Nick Lee, who is the chairman and founder of the Jodi Lee Foundation and is doing an amazing job educating people around bowel cancer and saving their lives. Until next time, my name is Con. I am the Conversationalist. And again, thanks for your time, Nick.
Thanks, Con. Appreciate it, mate.